영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
Spotlight, the Reluctant Opera Singer. Chapter 1, An Embarrassing Secret. Hurry up, Tyler! My mom's waiting in the car! Matt Whitman gathered up his backpack and sleeping bag. It was Saturday morning, and the two boys had just spent the night at their friend Brian's house. "Great sleepover, Brian," Matt said. "That movie was the scariest one yet." "It was pretty good," Brian said. "Even I was frightened." Tyler was still fumbling with his sleeping bag. "Well, I wasn't scared at all." Brian grinned at Tyler. "No, you just happened to go into the kitchen for more popcorn at the exact moment when those kids were walking into that haunted house." "Okay, maybe I was a little scared," Tyler admitted. "But you should have seen your face when that zombie jumped out of the bushes." They all laughed. Brian's phone buzzed. He frowned as he quickly read the text message. Then he put the phone back in his pocket. "Who was that?" Tyler asked. "Just Becky breaking up with me." "Didn't you two already break up twice this week?" Matt said. "Yeah, but we got back together." "Apparently you forgot to tell her," Matt said. Brian scowled at the joke, but Tyler laughed. Outside, Matt's mother honked the car horn. "See you later, Brian." Matt opened the front door. Tyler followed Matt as he ran down the walk and jumped into the back seat of the car. "Hi, guys," Mrs. Whitman said. "Did you get any sleep last night?" "Of course not, Mom. No one sleeps at a sleepover. Especially when we're watching really scary movies," Tyler said. "Now you admit they were really scary." Matt teased his friend as they drove away. "I thought you were just a little scared. Oh, wait a minute. Weren't you the one hiding your face in your pillow when the monster grabbed those kids? I thought you—" "My pillow! I forgot my pillow!" Tyler cried. "I couldn't find my backpack this morning, so I took off the pillowcase to use as a sack. We have to go back." Mrs. Whitman turned the car around and drove to Brian's house. Tyler ran in and soon returned with his pillow and backpack. "Brian's mom found my backpack underneath the chair," he explained happily as he buckled his seatbelt. "Are we all set now?" Mrs. Whitman turned on the car radio.
This next song is a very...
"Matt, it's almost time for your favorite program. They're doing Don Carlo today." Matt's eyes widened in horror. He couldn't believe his mother had just said that in front of Tyler. "What's wrong with you?" Tyler pointed at Matt. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Nothing." Matt concentrated on staring out the window. "Did you ever notice how many silver cars there are?" he said quickly. "That's probably the most popular color, don't you think?" But Tyler wasn't about to be distracted, especially after Matt had just been teasing him for being afraid. "What's your favorite show? Who's Don Carlo, and what are they doing to him?" "Don Carlo is the main character in an opera," Mrs. Whitman explained. It takes place in the 1500s, during the Spanish Inquisition, but it's really a tragic love story. Matt stayed silent. It was bad enough that his mother had jumped into the conversation, but did she have to embarrass him too? You like opera? Now it was Tyler's turn to widen his eyes in horror. Matt loves opera, Mrs. Whitman corrected him. We always listen to the opera program when we're driving around, doing errands on Saturdays. Right, Matt? Matt just grunted. His mom was making things worse. They needed to get on to another topic immediately. His mind whirred with possibilities, but he quickly settled on the local baseball team, the Philadelphia Phillies. Did you see that outfielder? You do mean opera as in... Tyler cleared his throat, clasped his hands together, and made a serious face. Me, he sang, imitating an opera star warming up. Something like that? He looked at Matt with a huge grin on his face. Not exactly. Matt could tell that Tyler was enjoying this way too much. Or is it more like this? La, 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 la. Tyler used as deep a voice as possible to sing down the scale. No, not at all. You should try listening to an opera, Tyler, Mrs. Whitman said as they arrived in front of Tyler's house. You might actually enjoy it. No thanks, but thanks for the ride, Tyler said. He pulled his backpack and the pillow and his sleeping bag and the bulging pillowcase from the car. He struggled up the driveway, but Matt didn't offer to help. Instead, Matt got out of the car and switched to the front seat. How could you do that to me, Mom? He said in a loud, angry voice. Now everybody knows I like opera. Not everybody, just Tyler, Mrs. Whitman said as she drove away from the curb. Believe me, it'll be everybody soon enough. I'm sure Tyler can't wait to tell people. I'm sorry I embarrassed you, but liking opera is nothing to be ashamed of. Plenty of people enjoy opera. Adults like opera, Matt corrected her. Kids think it's weird. Weren't you listening to Tyler? Everyone will be making fun of me as soon as he starts spreading the news. I don't want to go to school on Monday. Oh, Matt, that's 2 days away. I'm sure Tyler will have forgotten all about it by then. Mrs. Whitman looked over at Matt. What's that old expression? He'd forget his head if it wasn't attached? That's Tyler. Now let's enjoy the opera. The orchestra was playing the overture, which ended in an ominous thunder of drums. I can already tell from the music that this is going to be a dark opera, Mrs. Whitman smiled at Matt. You know you'll like this once it gets started. I don't even know who's singing today, Matt grumbled. And thanks to you and Tyler, I missed the synopsis of Act 1, so I'll have no idea what's going on until they give the synopsis of Act 2. Well, Don Carlo is the son of the King of Spain, and his father... Never mind, snapped Matt. I'll figure it out as we go along. But it's in Italian. Matt rolled his eyes. I don't have to understand the words to enjoy the music. He reached over and turned up the volume on the radio. Spotlight, the reluctant opera singer. Chapter 2, Wanted, boys who can sing. As soon as Tyler and Brian walked into music class on Monday, they ambushed Matt. "So I hear you're a real opera fan," Brian grinned. "Did your car window shatter while you were listening on Saturday?" Tyler sang, sliding up the scale until he ended in a high-pitched squeak. "I'm glad I left the car before the singing started." Matt put his books under his chair and sat down. "Nobody broke any glass, you guys. That only happens in cartoons." "Well, how long did that opera last anyway?" Brian said. "They usually go on for hours and hours, right?" "Days and nights," Tyler chimed in. It didn't last that long. Matt tried to peer around them to see what the teacher, Mrs. Menendez, had written on the board. "How can you even understand what's happening when it's all in a foreign language?" Tyler said. Matt sighed heavily. "You two are awfully curious about opera for people who can't stand it." "Oh, we're just trying to keep up with your latest activity," Brian said in a mockingly cheerful voice. "We want time for class." Mrs. Menendez clapped her hands. Brian took his seat next to Matt while Tyler sat behind them. "Before we return to our discussion of Baroque music, I'd like to make a plea for your help," Mrs. Menendez said. "I desperately need more people to join the school chorus, especially boys." "No way," Tyler muttered. Mrs. Menendez went on. "I don't know what any of you sound like because we don't sing in this class, but I'm sure there's some real talent lurking out there, just waiting to be discovered." Brian elbowed Matt. "Sounds like something you should try, opera fan." "No way! I'm not doing that," Matt said. Tyler and Brian snickered loudly, and the teacher looked in their direction. "Is there a problem, boys?" "No, Mrs. Menendez," Matt said. "We thought Matt was volunteering for chorus," Brian said as Matt glared at him. "Well, you should all consider trying out." Mrs. Menendez smiled hopefully at the boys. Matt ducked his head and stared at his hands. He liked to sing, but he wasn't going to give his friends any more ammunition in their war on opera. He also liked Mrs. Menendez's class. He especially enjoyed it when she played recordings to illustrate her points about composers. Today, she was talking about Handel. You might know him from Messiah, his famous choral piece that's often performed at Christmas, Mrs. Menendez said. But Handel composed other kinds of music too, including many operas. At the word operas, Tyler leaned forward and tapped Matt on the head with his pencil. Ow! Matt rubbed his head. This was going to be a long class. When music finally ended, Matt braced himself for another round of teasing from his friends. But Tyler was too busy searching through his books and notebooks to say anything. I know it's here somewhere, he mumbled as he opened his social studies book and shook it. What did you lose? Matt asked. My social studies homework. It's not here, so I must have left it at home. Well, you're in trouble now, Brian said. You know homework counts as part of our grade. Yeah, thanks. I'm aware of that. Maybe you could call home and have someone send it by drone, Matt said as they left the music room. It'll take us a few minutes to walk to class. Great idea, Brian laughed, but Tyler was not amused. Hey, look! Matt grabbed Brian's arm. Isn't that Becky walking with Jameson? She keeps looking over here like she wants to make sure you see she has a new boyfriend. Brian pretended to be very interested in getting a drink from the water fountain. What's she doing now? He whispered. Whoa! She's kissing him right here in the hall! Matt exclaimed. What? Brian stood up so quickly that he lost his grip on his books. They tumbled to the floor. This time, it was Tyler's turn to laugh. Gotcha, Matt said, as Brian frantically scanned the crowded hallway for his Becky. You deserved that for volunteering me for chorus. Matt was glad to be the one doing the teasing instead of getting grief from his friends. For the rest of the day, he laughed every time Tyler made kissing noises at Brian, or Brian waved his hand like a drone circling for a landing. After school, Matt had to see his science teacher to make up a test. When he finished, he still had 15 minutes before the late bus arrived to take him home. It was raining pretty hard, so he decided to wait inside the school. He was feeling happy because the science test had been easy. So, as he waited, he hummed a song to himself. Actually, it was more than just a song. It was Nessun Dorma, an aria from Turandot, a famous opera. Matt had listened to it so many times that he knew most of the words, even though they were in Italian. He started out humming softly, but gradually he sang louder and louder as he realized the empty corridor had great acoustics. Just as he reached the highest note, the door to the teacher's lounge flew open, and Mrs. Menendez rushed out.
Vincerò, vincerò.
Was that you singing, Matt? Matt didn't know what to say, but then he remembered what his mother always said. You can never go wrong with an apology. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. You weren't disturbing me at all. I had to come out and see who was singing. You have a fabulous soprano voice. You absolutely have to join chorus. Matt was flattered, but there was no way he was doing anything musical after the way his friends had reacted today. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that because I have... He stopped while he tried to think up an excuse. Mrs. Menendez jumped right in. Whatever you're doing, cancel it. Chorus is the activity for you. Matt wished she would go back into the teacher's room, but she kept talking to him and piling on the compliments. That's amazing that you can sing Nessun Dorma. Most kids have never heard of it. And your voice, so beautiful. You have a wonderful gift that you should share with everyone before your voice changes. I think my bus is coming, Matt finally said in desperation. Then he ran outside into the pouring rain. Spotlight. The Reluctant Opera Singer. Chapter 3. A Scary Movie Theater. Matt spent the rest of the week trying to avoid Mrs. Menendez. Normally, he looked forward to music class, but now he was glad he only had it once a week. He didn't want his friends to hear her praising his voice and pressuring him to join chorus. She really was his favorite teacher, and he hated saying no to her. And he did like to sing, but he liked to sing by himself, not with a group of kids, and certainly not where Tyler and Brian could hear him. All of a sudden, Mrs. Menendez seemed to be everywhere Matt was. In the school library, the cafeteria, and especially the hallways. But somehow Matt managed to stay out of her way, even when he panicked on Wednesday and came within an inch of walking into the girls' bathroom by mistake. By the time Friday came, he was exhausted from dodging her. So he was happy when his mother announced at breakfast on Saturday that she had a nice surprise for him. Instead of listening to an opera on the radio today, how would you like to actually see one? Great, Matt said. Do you mean the opera in Philadelphia? Or... He paused because the other possibility was so exciting he could barely say the words. Or are we going to the Metropolitan Opera in New York City? No, we're not going to the Met, Mrs. Whitman laughed. That's way too expensive, and besides, we couldn't get there in time. We're going to see an opera at a movie theater. Oh, Matt made a face as he scooped up another spoonful of cereal. Now, don't be disappointed. Matt's mom explained that the movie theater was showing a series of operas broadcast live from famous opera houses. Today's opera is The Barber of Seville, and it'll be just like seeing the live production. You might even like it more because you'll have a better view of the stage. Oh, that would be great, Matt said enthusiastically. Which movie theater are we going to? The one near the mall. Oh, no, we definitely can't go there. What if we run into someone I know? How is that a problem? Mrs. Whitman looked puzzled. If we see friends of yours, that just means they like opera too. In fact, would you like to invite Tyler to come along? He seemed curious about Don Carlo last week. I could try to get another ticket online. No, that wouldn't be good at all. Mrs. Whitman crossed her arms and gave an annoyed sigh. I thought you'd like to do this, but if you don't want to go... You don't understand, Mom. Zombie Invasion 4 is opening this weekend, and everyone will be going to see it. Do you really think your friends would go without you? You won't run into them. Matt had to admit it was highly unlikely that Brian and Tyler would see the movie without him, but that still didn't solve his problem. That movie theater has 12 screens. The odds we'll run into somebody I know in the lobby or parking lot are huge. And if we do? You just don't get it. Matt slammed his spoon so hard, milk splashed out of his bowl. He stormed out of the kitchen. Up in his room, he turned on his computer. He'd seen clips of operas online before, but he'd never watched an entire production. The trouble was that he did want to see this opera. He just didn't want to see it at that theater. Maybe it was playing somewhere else. He went online and quickly found The Barber of Seville and where it was showing. Now all he had to do was persuade his mother to go to one of those other theaters. He came back downstairs, where she had just finished breakfast. I know you don't like driving on highways, and there's no other way to get to that theater, he began. But what if we went to the movies in Doylestown? You always say you like the drive up there. That's almost an hour away, Mrs. Whitman said. Besides, I already bought tickets to this theater. Matt and his mom stood in the kitchen, staring at each other. He didn't know what else to say, but she did. Be ready to go at 11 o'clock or I'm leaving without you. I've heard these shows are crowded, so we need to get there early to find good seats. Matt went back to his room. There had to be some way that he could go to the opera without anyone seeing him. But he had no idea how to do that. With a sigh, he went back online and browsed his favorite websites. He was looking at some photos from famous operas when he had an idea. I'll go in disguise, he thought. People do that all the time in operas. He remembered how a character in The Magic Flute, a beautiful young girl, disguised herself as an old woman. Suddenly, he realized how easy it would be to disguise himself as an old man. Matt's grandfather had lived with them until he died. I think we still have some of his old clothes in the spare bedroom, Matt thought. He went off to explore the bureau and closet. He was so busy digging around that he almost didn't hear his mother. Matt, she called from downstairs. It's after 11 o'clock. Are you coming or not? Coming, he shouted. A few minutes later, he ran downstairs wearing his grandfather's hat with a scarf wrapped around the lower part of his face. He was also wearing his own sunglasses and carrying his grandfather's cane. A disguise? Matt's mom just shook her head. I guess you were serious about not wanting anyone to see you at the opera. At the theater, Mrs. Whitman stopped to buy some snacks at the counter in the lobby. Matt looked around nervously. Do you have to do that? He asked. You'll want something to eat later on, she said. This opera lasts 2.5 hours, and that doesn't include intermission. By the time they walked into the theater where the opera was showing, it was full. The only seats left were in the front row, but Matt didn't mind one bit. As the overture started, he removed his sunglasses and settled back in his seat, ready to enjoy the show. Spotlight, The Reluctant Opera Singer. Chapter 4, An Opera Lover in Disguise. Although Matt was in a movie theater, he felt as if he were watching The Barber of Seville at an opera house. On the screen, the curtains opened to reveal an elaborate set, a 2-story house on a plaza. Whoa, that looks so real. Where is that? He whispered to his mother. Seville, a city in Spain. It took Matt a few minutes to get used to watching the action and reading the English subtitles at the same time. But he soon caught on to the story, even though the performers were singing in Italian. The wealthy Count Almaviva had fallen in love with Rosina, the daughter of Dr. Bartolo. The Count followed Rosina home and stood under her window, serenading her. He's a good singer, Matt whispered. His mom nodded. Along came Figaro, the barber of Seville, a clever fellow who seemed to know all the local gossip. Figaro told the Count that Dr. Bartolo was not Rosina's father, but was instead her guardian, who intended to marry her. Meanwhile, Rosina looked out her window and fell instantly in love with the Count. Opera characters are always falling in love at first sight. Mrs. Whitman shook her head. I'm not sure that's a good thing. Matt knew they shouldn't be talking, but he was having fun, and so far, no one seemed to mind. The rich Count was now telling Rosina that he was a poor music student. He wanted to be sure that she loved him and not his money. I'm not the only one in disguise today, Matt thought. He felt hot in the crowded theater, so he looked around to make sure there was no one he knew. Then he took off his grandfather's hat and scarf. On screen, the two men plotted how the Count could get into Rosina's house to meet her. Figaro suggested the Count disguise himself as a soldier who needed a place to stay. The law required citizens to host soldiers. Wait, Matt said loudly. Now the Count is pretending to be a soldier? This guy has two disguises, and we're only at the beginning of this thing. Shh, a woman behind him said. Yes, his mom whispered, putting her finger to her lips. Matt watched the rest of the first act in silence. He liked the colorful costumes and the gigantic set, and he recognized some of the music from TV ads. He especially liked when a donkey danced across the stage. Rosina and the Count's romance grew more complicated as the doctor became suspicious of them. The Count abandoned his military disguise. Matt laughed at the twists and turns of the plot. At intermission, Mrs. Whitman got up to stretch her legs, but Matt remained in his seat, sipping soda and munching popcorn. The theater lights stayed low because there was still action on screen. Cameras backstage at the Opera House showed breathless singers hurrying off stage. Stagehands in black shirts and pants moved the next set into place. After a few more minutes, singers began to step into position for Act 2. Matt was so fascinated by what was happening behind the scenes that he almost didn't recognize the woman who walked in front of him. Mrs. Menendez? He thought, as the woman dropped into a seat. He wanted to turn to look at her, but he was afraid she'd notice him. As Act 2 began, he slipped on his grandfather's hat and scarf. This time, the Count was disguised as a new music teacher who came to Rosina's house. The Count told Rosina's father that the regular teacher was too sick to give her a lesson. The young couple sang a duet. Oh, that was lovely, Matt's mom whispered after they had finished. Matt liked the music, but he also liked that the piano moved around the stage. He could see there was someone underneath it, but that only made it funnier. The real music teacher soon showed up, and the Count and Figaro had to persuade him to pretend he was deathly ill. Matt laughed as characters dressed as gravediggers chased the music teacher around the stage. He was so involved in the story and the music that he forgot all about Mrs. Menendez until the Count and Rosina were happily married. But then he suddenly remembered. "Come on, let's get out of here," he said to his mother as the singers took their curtain call. "Just a minute. Don't forget Grandpa's cane, and make sure you pick up your cup and—" "Matt? Mrs. Whitman?" Matt groaned as Mrs. Menendez bustled over to greet them. "At first I didn't recognize you under that hat," she said to Matt. "I like your scarf. You look like an opera star. Did you know that one of the greatest tenors of all time, Luciano Pavarotti, always wore a scarf?" "Yeah, I know who he was." Matt looked longingly toward the exit. "I love his recording of Nessun Dorma. Nobody can sing that aria like Pavarotti." Mrs. Menendez sighed. "It's the best version I've ever heard," Matt said before he could stop himself. "Well, it sounds like you're a guy who really loves opera." Matt's mom gave him an encouraging look. There was nothing embarrassing about admitting he liked opera to an adult, but he still swallowed hard before he replied. "I do. We listen to the opera on the radio every Saturday." "I thought Matt would have fun actually seeing an opera," Mrs. Whitman said. "What did you think?" Mrs. Menendez asked Matt. "It's so much better than just listening to the opera. The sets and the costumes and the acting, everything was amazing." "And you can see how much effort singing takes at that level," Mrs. Menendez said. She went on about the opera, and Matt was actually enjoying himself. He was just about to ask a question when the conversation suddenly turned dangerous. "You know, Mrs. Whitman, Matt has such a wonderful voice. I've been trying to get him to join chorus." "Really?" Matt's mom stared at him in surprise. "You never told me that, Matt." He felt like he was in a horror movie, watching himself get eaten up by a monster. "I overheard him singing Nessun Dorma, and I couldn't believe his voice. You're his mother. Perhaps you can persuade him to sing with us?" "Don't worry, Mrs. Menendez. He'll be at chorus from now on. Right, Matt?" Matt stayed silent. "Ugh," he thought with dread. "Wait till Tyler and Brian hear about this. They're going to give me such a hard time."